Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, welcome students to another episode here. I must confess that I discovered Mr. Charles Glass when doing some research on the Sabra and Shatila massacres. It was an online research, and I came across a video in which I heard someone narrating the poem, Pity the Nation. It was a very good voice, it was a very attractive voice, and the words were very, very powerful, and the way the rendition was done by Mr. Charles Glass was simply amazing. I will just read a few lines, Mr. Glass, with your permission, I will just read a few lines from that wonderful poem. Pity the nation that is full of beliefs and empty of religion. Pity the nation that wears a cloth it does not weave, eats bread it does not harvest, and drinks wine that flows not from its own wine press. Pity the nation whose sages are dumb with years, and whose strong men are yet in the cradle. Pity the nation divided into fragments, each fragment deeming itself a nation. Mr. Glass, does that poem mean something to you, especially in the context of your career as a journalist?
Well, it means something to my understanding of Lebanon and the tragedy of Lebanon in the past century, yes. And Gibran saw it even before the country began to break up. And he understood his country very well. He emigrated to America and viewed it from that distance, but he never lost his understanding or his compassion.
So there was one question that George Orwell asked himself, and he answered it really well. It was why I write. So if that was the question that was put to you, how will you answer that?
I'll quote Dr. Samuel Johnson. No one but a blockhead writes for anything but money. That's how I make my living. I enjoy doing it. And I don't really know how to do anything else.
So you are a writer, a reporter, journalist, a lot of things. And from what I have heard coming from you, that you wouldn't want to be an advisor to any great government in the world. Is that true? And if that's true, why? Why do you choose not to be an advisor to a government?
Well, there are two reasons that spring to mind. First, it would be a heavy responsibility. Second, there isn't a government I can think of that I trust.
Right. So what are the three or four qualities that a good writer must have, and 3 or 4 qualities that a good journalist must have?
Well, I'm not really sure, but I'll say that what a journalist needs is a sharp eye, compassion for the people that he's writing about, not to take sides, to be speak the truth, and to write clearly and concisely for a readership who may or may not have ever been to the place that he's writing about. I'm not very philosophical about the profession of journalism or indeed of writing, so I haven't given it much thought.
All right. So when you're talking about journalism and writing, when you were a young man, who inspired you in your youth? Which writer inspired you and why?
In my youth, which part of my youth do you mean?
Like when you were in college, because this show is for college students mainly. College would mean 16 to 18-year-old.
Well, I studied university. I studied philosophy at university, so obviously I was reading more philosophers than anything else, and I would say that the people that I read the most productively and were most helpful: Plato, Bertrand Russell, Noam Chomsky, my own professor John Hosperth, and then of course fiction I loved those American writers of the interwar period, Hemingway and Fitzgerald, Steinbeck, Faulkner. But that was when I was young. I think I'm reading much more widely now.
Every time someone criticizes the status quo, like you mentioned, Noam Chomsky, my daughter is a great fan of Noam Chomsky's. When you criticize the status quo, when you criticize the way things are going in the world, you are immediately condemned as a left-wing extremist or a socialist or whatever. Why does that happen, and how do you cope with those labels that are put on you?
Well, when you oppose institutional structures and policies, you have to be prepared to be marginalized. They will not subsidize you or support you to attack them. It's perfectly reasonable.
Should I repeat the question?
No, I'm answering the question. I think there's a delay on our.
I think you broke up. I think there's a delay on our. Yeah, there's a delay. So I'll repeat the question. The question is that people like Noam Chomsky are immediately condemned as far left writers. Is that fair? And how do people cope with such allegations?
It's reasonable for institutions that are attacked and criticized by Noam Chomsky and many others not to want to support them and to try to marginalize them and to dismiss their opinions as invalid. But that just helps them to find a wider audience. Noam Chomsky, whom I know well and whom I respect above almost anyone else I know, when he speaks, he fills an auditorium. He could fill a football stadium. He may not get on CBS and NBC, but the public want to hear what he has to say. And so it's very sad that he's not well at the moment. We don't know what he would tell us about Gaza. I'm sure it would be very insightful, probably better than most of what we're hearing. We can't expect institutions, particularly powerful imperial institutions, not to criticize those who criticize them. We have to expect, you have to live with it. And if you don't like it, then you have to go over to the other side and go along with what they do.
True. How has the influx of money impacted the media? I believe that 60 Minutes was the first program that actually returned a profit. Before that, media was not that much for money. It was not that commercial. So how has this influx of money impacted the media, in your opinion?
Well, that's not quite correct. Perhaps that was CBS's first commercially productive news program. But the newspaper industry in America was always very profitable. I mean, the Hearst chain, the Gannett chain, Associated Press, UPI, when people read papers, the advertising revenue was huge, and people paid as well to read the paper. So there were two income streams right there. And the cost of putting out a newspaper was not so great. So there's always been a profit. Now there's no profit in newspapers anymore because of the internet. And only old people watch television news. So the money has gone into social media, which is a retrogressive step, obviously. But you can't really change the economic models that work for the big businesses who advertise.
So, in the presence of all this finance and in the presence of these special interest groups, is it possible for media to be genuinely responsible, especially mainstream media?
I'm not sure what you mean by genuinely responsible, but there are many good journalists on every newspaper and in every television network who are doing their best. And there are many bad ones who really are not doing what they should be doing. It varies from person to person. The institutions themselves tend to support and promote those who go along with the program. So if you want to get ahead, you better get along.
Right. For the new generation of journalists, what will you advise them? How can they balance the needs of the readers with their personal journalistic goals and the needs and goals of the media houses for whom they're working?
It's very difficult, and it would vary from country to country, and newspaper, or television network. I don't know that there is a general answer to that question. You have to negotiate your way through it to keep your job, to support your family, and yet maintain your integrity. It's not an easy thing to do. Also, particularly in countries like yours, you risk going to prison, or one of your journalists was assassinated recently. It can be a very dangerous business. Julian Assange has been in prison now for 5 years in Belmarsh prison because he revealed state secrets that showed American war crimes. You have to be prepared. If you're going to be honest, if you're going to be fair to your conscience, you have to be prepared to pay a price.
So, if you mentioned Julian Assange, so people like Julian Assange and Snowden, the example that has been made of them, after that, will people genuinely bring out the truth? Will they actually work to bring out the truth? Do you see a future for idealism, or will idealism just die and people will work just for a living?
I think that investigative journalists will carry on, even though they don't have the outlets that they used to have. They will carry on doing their work as best they can. The problem will be, will the whistleblowers within governments and within big corporations be willing to take the risk of providing information to journalists, as they did with WikiLeaks, or as Snowden did by revealing what he knew to Glenn Greenwald? They are the ones who are at risk. An Australian whistleblower only yesterday was sentenced to 5 years and 8 months in prison for revealing that Australian troops in Afghanistan had committed war crimes, committed murder, and he's going to prison. So it's really the leakers, the people on the inside whose conscience forces them to go public with what they know, who are at most at risk, and that's going to be a problem, a big problem in the future.
Does going to the public actually make any difference at all? I mean, we have the example of the Kent state where the public knew everything. They rose against the government of the day, but they sent in the National Guard, they killed people. An American policy, or I will not call it American policy, but I'll call it imperial policy. Imperial policy continued as it had to continue. So there are two things here. Will informing the public actually help? Or a better option is that you do what the other people are doing. You just form lobbies and pressure groups and then get the results that you want to get. Which in your opinion will be the more effective option?
An old friend of mine, one of the best war photographers of his generation, was a man called Philip Jones Griffiths. And Philip documented the American war in Vietnam very, very well. He published a book of his photographs called Vietnam Inc. And at one of the reunions of veteran correspondents from Vietnam, years after the war, after the American war there ended, Philip was asked, well, what were you doing there? Were you just exploiting people as well, taking their pictures and so on? And Philip said, no, I was gathering evidence for the next Nuremberg trial. So all of us in this field of international journalism and war reporting, we are going to make it impossible for the public to say, as many Germans said after the horrors of the Second World War and the genocide of the Second World War, as they said, we didn't know. We want to make sure that they do know, and they have to answer for what happened.
Right. I wrote an article in 1993 on Charles Taylor, the strongman of Liberia. Now, I asked that question for a reason from my own experience, because I wrote about him, and I wrote, the article was actually published in a Pakistani newspaper, and I wrote that this man is a killer, and this man is what people call genocide. He's guilty of genocide. Charles Taylor was actually arrested in 2010, and he was charged with the same crimes that he had committed. But what I realized was, I stand to be corrected, maybe I'm wrong, it was not because of writers like me. It was only because that the international establishment or the government of the time, they decided that it was time for Charles Taylor to go. So I don't know. I was very proud of it, and that's and I know that that's one great moment of being a journalist, when you have actually exposed something, and then that person is accused of that crime that you exposed a long time back. But I felt that the war in Liberia ended because the foreign powers refused to fund Charles Taylor any longer, and they refused to supply weapons to him any longer. When you look at the war in Vietnam, and when you look at the war in Lebanon, especially the civil war in Lebanon, what was the contributing factor that ultimately brought peace? Did the imperial powers lost interest in the area?
The fact that political factors determine the outcomes of these conflicts, the eventual sending someone to justice, shouldn't stop a reporter from telling the truth in the meantime. People have a right to know what's going on in their world. So that in case, let's say, of Liberia, at least a reader of your newspaper will not want to do anything by Liberian products, if there are any, so to help the Liberian economy to continue with these crimes. The same is true with all the reporting now on Gaza. A lot of the reporting has led people to sever their connections with trading with Israel and with things produced in the Israeli settlements in the West Bank. That is a case where journalism is happening. A lot of people just don't want to be responsible for these horrors that are being committed.
Okay, I'd like to talk a little bit about Lebanon on a lighter note. Which city do you like more, Beirut, Sidon, or Tyre?
Well, actually, my favorite place in Lebanon is a village in the north called Ehud, where my grandmother was born. It's a beautiful village of stone villas and waterfalls and cedar trees. I am very happy up there. I like all of them. If I did have to have a favorite, it would be my grandmother's village.
That's great. All right, let's speak about Lebanon a little bit more. One thing that sets Lebanon apart from other countries in the region is that it actually had a national pact. But some people say that the national pact actually led to the crisis of 1958. So what are your views on that?
Well, the national pact was an unofficial agreement. It wasn't real, to share out power among the religious sects in the country. And thus, the president would always be a Maronite, the prime minister would always be a Sunni Muslim, the speaker of the House would always be a Shia Muslim, the minister of defense would be a Druze, and then all offices below that would also be distributed proportionally among the sects. So this gave the sectarian leaders enormous power, patronage, because they could choose which members of the Maronite or the Druze sect would get the jobs that they in the civil service, and therefore of government contract. It was a fundamentally corrupt system, but at the time they couldn't think of any other way of managing the fact that many Sunni Muslims wanted to be part of Syria. They always felt historically part of Syria. They did not want this separate Lebanese Christian state to be second-class citizens in it. And the crisis of 1958 was actually brought about because the president, Camille Chamoun, Maronite, wanted to run for a second term in violation of the Constitution. The Constitution said each president would serve one term, and his term was ending in 58. He wanted to have a second term. Arab nationalists, the Sunnis, were backed by Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. The Maronites were backed by the French, and so there was a showdown. It wasn't a bloody civil war of the kind that we saw from 1975 to 1990, but it was a beginning of the rupture within the Lebanese state. It manifested itself more fully later.
Why did the Palestinians get involved with people like Kamal Jumblat? I mean, it was something which was internal to Lebanon. Were they being used by the powers? Because the non-Palestinian Arabs have often blamed the Palestinians for their troubles. What is your take on that?
Well, the Palestinians, after the June 1967 war, when Israel defeated Syria, Jordan, and Egypt in 6 days and conquered the West Bank, the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and the Sinai Peninsula, the Palestinians, who had until then relied on the Arab states for the support they needed to be able to go home. Remember that 3/4 of them had been expelled from their homes in 1948 by the Israelis. And in 1967, with the bankruptcy of the Arab states, the complete demoralization of the Arab states, the Palestinians believed that they had to take up arms themselves and fight a commando against the Israelis to be able to go home or to end the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. It was a futile enterprise from the beginning because they were severely outnumbered by the Israelis in every material aspect. But they made their base in Jordan, and when it became untenable in Jordan, when they looked like the Palestinians might take over the Jordanian state, King Hussein threw them out, and they came to Lebanon. And then they tried to launch their revolution from Lebanon, sending commandos across the border into Israel from Lebanon. And the Lebanese state simply just couldn't support it. Lebanon was a weak country, deliberately. It had chosen to be a weak country. And it couldn't defend the Lebanese or the Palestinians in the refugee camps. And the war just grew exponentially until the Israelis invaded in 1982 and killed between 10 and 20,000 people during the course of that invasion. Put Beirut under siege, rather similarly to the siege of Gaza today. Lebanon just could not support the Palestinian Revolution, and no Arab state wanted to support the Palestinian Revolution for an armed conflict. But at that time, remember, the Viet Cong were doing well in Vietnam. There was a kind of dream that guerrilla war, particularly a Marxist guerrilla war, would bring freedom and liberation to people. It didn't happen, and it certainly wasn't going to happen in Lebanon.
There was a massacre called Quarantina, I believe. Quarantina massacre. Then there was the Al Damour massacre. Then there was the Tal Az-Zatar massacre, which all ended with the Sabra and Shatila. The word genocide is used to describe these things, but you've studied philosophy. I've also studied a bit of philosophy. Personally, I don't understand how far it is right to use that word genocide, because if you take one human being and another human being from another nation, the gene pool is not that different. The gene pool of human beings is almost the same as compared to the gene pool of one species of animals and another species of animals. In any case, whether I'm right or wrong, what, in your opinion, drives people to such madness? I think you covered the Al-Zatar massacre.
When people go into conflict, take up arms, they find that they're capable of doing things that they would not have done before. And the more that they are exposed to violence and committing violence, the more extreme that violence can and does become. I've covered wars in, I think I've lost you. I've covered wars most of my life, actually, most of my adult life. And I've never covered one that didn't have massacres, rape, looting, burning of houses, killing of children. That's what happens. When you choose to go to war, that's what you choose. That is your commitment. as one of the prosecutors, Hartmut Shawcross, said at the Nuremberg trials, war is the evil from which all those other evils proceed. And you cannot go to war without all of that. We're seeing it today in Ukraine. We're seeing it today in Gaza. You launch a war, you're going to kill a lot of innocent people. And the young men you send to do that will commit massacres. It's inevitable, and it always happens.
True. When you look at these massacres and you compare it with what's happening in Gaza today, how far worse is Gaza compared to what you covered in your time?
Well, I remember very well the August 1976 massacre of about 3,000 Palestinian civilians.
Please tell us about that. Please tell us about it.
In the Tel Azatra refugee camp. Tel Azatra refugee camp was on the road between the Christian Mountain and Christian East Beirut. It was a very bad place for Palestinians to be at the time. For a while, Yasser Arafat's commandos protected the camp. Then they negotiated their way out and left the civilians helpless, much as they did when they evacuated Beirut in 1982 and left the Palestinian refugees in Sabra and Shatila camps helpless. And the Maronite militias, who felt hard done by the Palestinians, felt the Palestinians were destroying their state, went in and massacred them, and in the most brutal way. They didn't think to keep journalists out, so we went in doing it. Well, not after it was happening, but while it was happening. And we saw people driving over people's bodies, flattening them into the tarmac. Bulldozers digging up bodies out of houses and dropping them in pits. Children beheaded. It was mankind at its worst. What we're seeing in Gaza is even worse because the numbers are much higher. We're now, if Tel Azatra was 3,000 people by a maddened Maronite militia,
30,000.
This is 35,000 people so far. It's not over yet. 35,000 people by a national army with much better weapons. The Marines didn't have all that heavy artillery and didn't have an air force. The Israelis have complete dominance of the air, sea, and land, and can do anything they want, and are doing anything they want, and are not discouraging their soldiers from committing war. In fact, I mean, some of the soldiers document them themselves and put it on social media. They're proud of it, and there is no prosecution, no proper investigation into these things. So they like all the young men everywhere. I told you in wars, they will do their worst, and they are doing their worst. And the United States is paying for it, and is giving them the weapons to make it possible.
Oh, so which way do you see this going when or if Mr. Trump comes into power?
Well, the next presidency won't begin until January of 2025. By then, one assumes that Netanyahu will have finished his dirty war in Gaza, and we'll see what the consequences of that are. And Trump may not be in a position to decide what happens militarily, but he will be in a position to decide what happens to all of those Palestinians and whether they can rebuild their lives, whether they can, as they've been promised, have a state. With Trump, I certainly doubt it, but the Democrats have never been much better on that either.
We have discussed Lebanon, but I definitely, we have 15 minutes. I want to talk to you about the book, but before I talk to you about your book, I will talk to you about one book which I feel that we in this part of the world need to read, and unfortunately we are not reading it. And that book is The 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T. Lawrence. Now my question is that in the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, when the Colonel talks about the revolt of 1916, he puts the blame for everything squarely on the Turks. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, that's not a fair assessment of the book, actually. It doesn't. It's not a moral book. It's not putting blame on anybody. The Turks ruled the Arab lands of Syria and Iraq for centuries. Lawrence thought that the Arabs wanted their freedom and that he would lead them to their freedom. He started one of the most successful guerrilla campaigns in history. But he did it in conjunction with an invading British army that came from Egypt across Gaza and up through Palestine into Syria. It would not have succeeded but for the British army and also the British and French navies offshore keeping Turkish supplies down. He felt that he had betrayed the Arabs because he said that he believed in their independence, and of course they didn't get their independence. Britain and France colonized them, and they cut the land up when the people of Syria did not want to be divided into Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, and so forth. They wanted to be one large state with Faisal as their king. They didn't get that. But then again, colonial people never do get what they want.
But didn't he say that he was throwing the Arabs into the war knowing that the British are not going to give them one state?
Well, when he wrote the book, he knew, but at the time, he didn't know. He didn't find out until later.
Okay. All right. Now, the Sykes-Picot Agreement, the original name of Sykes-Picot Agreement was the Sazonov-Sykes-Picot Agreement, which means that the Russians were also very phenomenally involved in what they wanted to get out of the Ottoman Empire. What role has Russia played in the Middle East to help create the mess that the Middle East is in today? We always blame the British, but how do you assess the Russian role in the Middle East right from the Sazonov-Sykes-Picot Agreement right up till the 1967 or the 1973 war?
Well, the Russians were thrown out of the Sykes-Picot Agreement after the October Revolution of 1917 when Lenin withdrew from the war on the Allied side. So they were no longer entitled under Sykes-Picot to the spoils of the war. The Tsar had wanted to take certain bits of Turkey in the north, just as the British and the French wanted to take bits of the Ottoman Empire in the south. They didn't get it. They were out of the game. They were involved in their own civil war for years and didn't get involved again in the Middle East seriously until the Cold War, when they backed anybody that wasn't backed by the U.S. And then the U.S. and Russia both played a negative role in dividing the region, making the states in the region buy lots of weapons to protect themselves against mythical threats, and then not doing anything, neither the Russians nor the Americans nor the British nor the French doing anything for the Palestinians to resolve this issue of what happens to these dispossessed stateless people.
Looking back at your career, if you had to offer yourself one great advice, what would that advice be?
Go into banking and make some money.
Bankers have become banksters after 2008 crash.
Not only that, they were along for a long time, not just that.
I'll give you a clap.
Thank you.
Okay. Banking. So Kennedy's father used to say that banking can take you anywhere. So really, he went a long way because of banking. If you have one advice to give future journalists, what will that be?
Well, my first bit of advice is be very careful about doing it, because there are fewer jobs than there ever were. Most American newspapers have closed. Thousands of journalists are out of work. They end up doing public relations of things that are the absolute antithesis of journalism. So be very, very careful. Second, be very careful about who you work for. That his or her views of the world align closely with your own, so you're not in constant conflict. And fourth, save some money, because you might be out of work one day and you've got to take care of yourself.
Did you save money during your career?
I wish I had.
I'm a teacher and I have the same wish. Soldiers don't go mad. No comment. Right now I'm in Pakistan, and a lot of things are happening here. A lot of Pakistanis will disagree with you. What is Soldiers Don't Go Mad about? And what do you think about brotherhood between soldiers during war?
Well, Soldiers Don't Go Mad is from the title comes from a poem by Siegfried Sassoon, the famous World War II poet, who said, "Soldiers don't go mad unless they lose control of ugly thoughts that send them jabbering among the trees." And he wrote that when he was a patient in a mental hospital, suffering from shell shock. He was there with another famous poet, Wilfred Owen, who was also suffering even more severely from shell shock. The story of the book is this: what industrial warfare did to those young men between 1914 and 1918. Being in trenches, lice-infested, rat-infested, under constant artillery bombardment, with poison gas, losing your friends to flamethrowers, seeing them burned alive, losing your own brother in offensives. It was more than the human psyche could take. And hundreds of thousands of men actually broke down, had nervous breakdowns, and they needed treatment. And my book is about those men, what happened to them, and the kind of treatment they received. Some of the treatment was very good and very sensitive, and some of it was terrible. They were given electric shock treatments, cold bath treatments. They didn't really have much chance of recovery.
This book is available.
We call it post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Post-traumatic stress. A lot of soldiers who came back from the Gulf War, they also there was something called the Gulf War syndrome at the time. Are you aware of that? Was that also related to the post-traumatic stress?
Well, that they thought was something to do with the chemicals that we're using. There was something in the air that they breathe. It may well have been nervous breakdowns. It may well have been that. I don't know. But every war has it. In World War II, they called it battle fatigue. In Vietnam, it was, what did they call it? I guess in Vietnam, they started calling it stress syndrome or battle trauma. It's hard. People have nervous breakdowns in civilian life because they can't take the pressure of family and jobs. It's much more exaggerated when you're out killing people. When you feel guilt about that, because that's not what your mother raised you to do, is take you away. And there's that, plus you're losing your friends, plus you may lose your limbs, plus you're risking your life. There are a lot of things that impinge on your psyche, and sometimes you just can't take anymore. During the First World War, the psychiatrists called this phenomenon the fight or flight syndrome. Your natural instinct is to flee, to save your life. Survival is your first instinct as a human being, but your first duty as the human being, as a soldier, is to fight. So when you can't resolve that conflict, you don't know what to do. That's when you break.
I have 2 or 3 minutes, and I have to ask you one final question before I let you go, and that is, what on earth has happened to the quality of political leadership? Wherever you look in the world, there was a time when there were giants everywhere. Today, you don't even have dwarfs. Why has the quality of leadership fallen that badly?
It's a very good question, something I give a lot of thought to, and I change my mind in terms of conclusions almost every day. There are, a few bright lights on the horizon in terms of political leadership. You have one in your country, but he's in prison, and he is a very impressive man, a very impressive politician, and was a great cricketer, as you know.
The problem in our country is the problem in our country is that the same that the Americans faced when they had George Washington. Even if you are Lincoln, so what? You are not Washington. Are you going to run for a 3rd term? Why? You think you're better than Washington? The problem in our country is we have Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan. Now everyone dwarfs in comparison with him. We have had good leaders. There's no doubt about that. But there was a Christian editor of Dawn. He was a Syrian Christian, and he chose not to come to Pakistan. And he was a big critic of Jawaharlal Nehru. He lived in India. He didn't come to Pakistan. And someone asked him before his death, why didn't you go to Pakistan if you dislike Nehru and Gandhi so much? And he said, there's a simple reason. His name was Karaka, I think. There's one simple reason. Pakistan needed a Jinnah to create it. It needs a Jinnah to build it and put it on sound footing. And this nation will never produce two Jinnahs. There was only one Jinnah. So that is the problem that we have. So we need a leader of very big stature to do things. But nonetheless, there are good leaders. I'm not saying that they are not good leaders. There are good leaders, and hopefully things will improve. But this is a question that bothers me. If Lincoln had known that Trump will become the leader of the Republican Party, or if Jinnah had known that Nawaz Sharif will become leader of the Muslim League, they would have been embarrassed to death. I don't know. That's what I think. Who is your favorite leader, by the way?
Today?
Today.
I can't think of anyone.
That's the problem. That's the problem. That's the whole problem. We can't think of. All right, Mr. Glass, it was a pleasure. And I certainly hope that this will not be our first meeting. Maybe after the war is over, let us all pray for peace. It is prayer time here. We're having Adhan. Let us all pray for peace in Gaza, in the Ukraine, in all around the world. And let us hope that all of us can live together, respect each other, realize that we have the same gene pool. We were not made to be enemies of one another. Any final thoughts, and then we will close.
Well, no, thank you very much. It was very good to meet you, and I hope we meet in person one day.
Please buy this book, Soldiers Don't Go Mad. Charles Glass is one of my favorite journalists for two reasons. He is courageous, and he is full of humility. This is a hero. This is my hero. Charles Glass is my hero. But look at the humility in this human being. If you want to succeed, students, I need to tell you this. If you want to succeed in life, you have to be committed. You have to be hardworking. But at the same time, you should have the virtue of humility. Don't try to pretend what you're not. Even if you have achieved a lot, humility is your ultimate asset, and people will love you for it, just as I love Charles Glass. And the website, Mr. Charles Glass's website is charlesglass.net. Please go and read about your leader, Imran Khan. I know a lot of you are very enamored of Imran Khan. His picture is there. Is his picture still there on your website?
Yes, I wrote a piece about Imran Khan and Julian Assange and what they have in common.
Yes, what Julian Assange and Imran Khan have in common. And you people can read it. You need to read more at your age. You need to read. You need to increase your perspective. Thank you very much indeed. God bless you, and hopefully we will meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.